Greetings. We're in the Pure Worship book, a new chapter. Describe the temple, this time based on the temple vision, which takes up, when you look at the totality of it, the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's very important. Mm-hmm. What do they do with it? So let's look at the heading, first of all, is describe the temple. And then they have just that one phrase from one verse, which is Ezekiel 43, verse 10.
Yeah, and it's only 3 words out of the text.
And what did they say the focus of this vision is?
The meaning of Ezekiel's glorious temple vision.
All right, first of all, we're going to see what they do with it. 3 paragraphs here to start with. And then we'll look at the context of the text, Ezekiel 43, verse 10. What's in those first 9 verses?
Yeah. We're on page 137, in case you're following along.
And I'm going to be reading from the screen, and Vivian from the book.
Mm-hmm. You're starting.
Here we go. Picture Ezekiel at 50 years of age. He can now look back on a quarter of a century spent in exile. The temple in Jerusalem has long since been in ruins. If Ezekiel ever cherished hopes of serving as a priest there, those dreams lie in ruins too. Some 56 years must yet pass before the exile will end. So, Ezekiel knows that it is unlikely that he will live long enough to see Jehovah's people restored to their homeland, let alone to see the temple rebuilt. Do such thoughts bring him a measure of sadness?
How kind of Jehovah to choose this time to give Ezekiel a most extensive vision, one that will surely bring the faithful man a great deal of comfort and hope. By means of that vision, the prophet is transported back to his homeland and set down on a very high mountain. In this lofty setting, he is met by a man whose appearance was like that of copper. That angelic guide takes him on a thorough tour of an imposing temple complex. And they say to read Ezekiel 40, verses 1 to 4.
We won't necessarily do that because they're going to paraphrase it right here.
We're actually... Oh, yeah, okay. It all seems so real. For Ezekiel, the experience must be faith-strengthening, overwhelming, and perhaps a bit puzzling. Though the temple that he sees has many familiar features, it is also vastly different from the one he knew back in Jerusalem.
This intriguing vision fills the last 9 chapters of Ezekiel's book. Let us now discuss the attitude that we need to adopt as we approach this vision and seek understanding. Then we will consider whether what Ezekiel saw was the great spiritual temple that the Apostle Paul discussed at length centuries later. Finally, we will examine what the vision meant to Ezekiel and to his fellow exiles. Well, that all sounds good, but I am disturbed by the fact we've already leapt to the idea of a spiritual temple in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Well, what did this mean to Ezekiel? Is the last question is the one we need to do first, actually.
Yeah.
It's what does this mean to Ezekiel at the time? And they have made a good point back in about the 4th line of paragraph 2. By means of that vision, the prophet is transported back to his homeland. So in the vision, he doesn't just see a temple, he sees mountains, land that he's familiar with, the land of Israel. And then you realize that for Ezekiel and his fellow exiles, and for all Jews right up until the New Testament, including Paul, this meant more than just what does it mean? What does it symbolize? Something like we always think, we default to that, right? It meant the hope for his people and for his land. Let's not forget that before God gave Abraham any instructions as to what he was to do and gave him any promises about his offspring, before any of that, he said, go to a land I will show you. So from the very beginning, all the promises of God are bound up with a certain place.
Yeah.
And you've at least acknowledged here that he would be a patriot, long for his homeland, and know he's going to die outside of it.
Yeah. And so when you refer to Paul, even Paul, because the temple was there, would think of a literal temple.
Well, he would think
not
both.
A spiritual temple, just a spiritual temple. We, because there's no temple there and we don't live there, we immediately go to spiritual.
Yeah, but for Ezekiel, as for Paul, he's capable of thinking both thoughts at the same time. There is a
Yeah.
pattern in heaven. The law itself actually says that the things that Moses was told to build on earth, the tabernacle, was patterned after something that already existed. A spiritual temple, you want to call it? Fine.
Mm-hmm.
But both for Ezekiel. He is, when he thinks about temple, he defaults, of course, not to a symbolic idea, but to what he's familiar with in Jerusalem. He is a priest,
Yeah,
as they
and so
acknowledge it.
they say some of it would be familiar to him.
Some of it would be different, and it is. There's parts of this new revelation of this temple to come. Parts of it are different than the old temple, but he is familiar with the symbolism of it already. But it is a literal place that has symbolic aspects
Yeah.
and values. So it does represent certain things, and it will continue to represent the same things in this vision. But there are details that are different.
Yeah.
But we need to get in our minds that both Paul and Ezekiel could have both thoughts at the same time. It was not either a literal or a symbolic.
Yeah.
It was both and. So,
So-
for instance, for Paul, when he's talking in Ephesians 2 about a spiritual temple that's not built with hands,
The church
he's also
being like
planning to go
stones,
to
right?
visit the real temple, the literal temple in Jerusalem, just a few years later. That's where he's finally arrested, right?
Yeah. And then the Thessalonians passage you were
Yeah,
making
well,
out too.
this is very important even for the future, because Paul talks about in 2 Thessalonians 2 that the man of lawlessness, who most of us equate with the Antichrist, will stand in the temple of God, claiming that he is himself is God. So which one is it? Is it in the temple, the church, the congregation, Ephesians 2, or is it in the literal temple in Jerusalem? Christians still fight about that. But Paul's capable of having
both
both
ideas
ideas
in
at
his
the
head.
same time.
Yeah.
You're not.
Because he recognizes a spiritual element to the church as like spiritual stones. They're the building of the church.
Yeah,
But he's also aware of a physical
absolutely.
of
So
God.
we want to read the context of verse 10, 43:10, where they get this idea of this temple, and of course they default to the symbolic interpretation of it for the rest of this book.
So we'll read 1 to 10 of 43 Ezekiel. Then he led me to the gate that is facing east. There I saw the glory of the God of Israel coming from the east. And his voice was like the sound of rushing waters, and the earth was illuminated by his glory. What I saw was like the vision I had seen when I came to bring the city to ruin, and it appeared to be like what I had seen near the river Chebar, and I fell with my face to the ground. Then the glory of Jehovah entered the temple through the gate facing the east. A spirit then raised me up and brought me into the inner courtyard, and I saw that the temple had become full of the glory of Jehovah. Then I heard someone speaking to me out of the temple, and the man came and stood beside me, and he said to me, Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place for the soles of my feet, where I will dwell among the people of Israel forever. The house of Israel will no longer defile my holy name. They and their kings, by their spiritual prostitution and by the carcasses of their kings at their death, by putting their threshold next to my threshold, and their doorpost beside my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them. They defiled my holy name by the detestable things they did, so I exterminated them in my anger. Now let them put their spiritual prostitution and carcasses of their kings far away from me, and I will dwell among them forever. As for you, Son of Man, describe the temple to the house of Israel, so that they will feel ashamed because of their errors, and they shall study its plan.
So it's very plain if you read all 10 verses instead of a fraction of one verse that this is about Israel. The same people that had committed all these abominations are one day going to be cleansed. Now you could say, well, only these promises would only apply if they shaped up. But the point is, by this time, chapter 36 and 37 and 38 and 39 are behind us. We're in 43 now. What do 36 through 39 predict? That one day they will be cleansed. They will stop profaning his name, and he himself will pour his spirit upon them. And so this is also presupposing all of that has already happened. You don't presuppose any of that in this book. Yeah. You actually say it's all applied to Jehovah's Witnesses today.
You just replace them with you.
But obviously you can't read these 10 verses and think he's talking about anybody else except the people who sinned against him.
Yeah,
but
who
then
were ashamed for defiling.
The dominant thought here is the grand finale, as it were, of what he promised in Leviticus way back in the time of Moses. He said that his plan is to come and dwell among them. And here it has been accomplished. He has come. And when he comes, is it coming symbolically to a temple or spiritually to a temple? No, it's his glory coming. It's something he says, I saw. And of course we have clear predictions of that in Isaiah and Zechariah. They're going to, the world is going to see something, and Revelation just seals it by saying in Revelation 1:7 that one day every eye will see him. Yes, even those who pierced him will see him. They will see his glory, and they will come to worship him in this temple. Now this is said over and over again in the prophets, and only by a determined effort can you make it all symbolic.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of even Solomon, you know, they couldn't stand in the temple because of what was there. So they saw something. They
saw the Shekinah glory, we call it. God dwelling. And that's what Shekinah in the Hebrew original means. It's dwelling in the midst of. So the Shekinah glory tabernacled in the body of Christ, and one day will tabernacle, as it describes here, right in the midst of Israel, so that all nations will come up to worship him. I love verse 7 here. Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the people of Israel forever. So this is not a promise about the church or the congregation. It's not to be spiritually applied, although of course it has spiritual ramifications. But this is talking about what men will experience with their senses. What's our link?
We're linking to a video that we did on Isaiah 6, McLaren. Can we see God Yahweh as he really is? Even seraphs can't look at him, yet Isaiah saw his glory.
Now McLaren, of course, links this to the more famous passage in John 12, where John plainly says they saw his glory, but who is he? In Isaiah it is Yahweh, in John it is Christ. See you next time.
Bye.